It was all ACC in the South region, but all chalk in the Midwest as the full Elite Eight picture comes into focus.
Locked On Podcast Network presents the 2024 NCAA Bracket Breakdown. Presented by Nissan.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball live postcast episode here, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank all of you for joining us here live after the conclusion of the Sweet 16 matchups here, as we now have a full look at the Elite Eight and those matchups which are set to get started on Saturday afternoon. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined by co-host Isaac Shead. Thanks again for listening. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Folks, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be just around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. We're going to get into these matchups that we saw on Friday evening. Want to also shout out our sponsor at Amazon Music. You can listen to this show ad-free on Amazon Music. We are thrilled with that partnership with Amazon in particular because there is a beautiful billboard in Times Square right now through April 4th that has the Locked On College Basketball logo on it. Go find our social medias. We posted some pictures there. Really, really cool thing for us to be able to see and witness as we kind of enjoy this second season here of this Locked On College Basketball podcast. All right, Isaac, let's start in the South region where we saw a pair of victories by the ACC programs. We came very close to having two Elite Eight matchups between ACC schools, which would guarantee half of the Final Four coming from the Atlantic Coast Conference. Unfortunately, North Carolina unable to take care of business against Alabama, but we do have Duke versus NC State. That game is going to go that we're going to talk about how we got to that game, which started with NC State picking up a huge upset win over Marquette out of the Big East. This is an 11 seed over a 2 seed, 67-58. And Isaac, that almost doesn't feel like an accurate representation of how this game went. It was a more or less a blowout for the Wolfpack throughout the game, and in particular because of some pretty horrendous shooting from Marquette.
Yeah. And Andy, before even talking the game, can we just appropriately think about and contextualize how redonkulous what NC State is doing here is? Yeah. The ACC tournament run alone was special enough, knocking off, as you had pointed out, 5 teams that had all won national championships along the way to winning 5 games in 5 days. The second team to ever do that, joining the Kemba Walker UConn team. We know that team went on to win a national championship. But, Andy, we said, look, I get it. It's cool what NC State has done, but this team is not that team. They're not going to do that. But, Andy, they win in the
still here.
They won in the round of 64. They won in the round of 32. And, that kind of got fortunate because they faced Oakland in the second round. And I know they had to win in 11-6 to get to that second round, but still. But, Andy, this is a whole different thing now. Because now it's Marquette. And I know that they beat like North Carolina in the ACC tournament final, and that's great and fine. But the tournament championships are so, so different. With this one, this is playing like one of the Big East powerhouses that I know had a little bit of a downturn down the stretch because of being without Tyler Kolek. But Andy, what they're doing is special and historic. And I just want to make sure that even before talking about the game, we just stop and appreciate that run in this moment.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And I think because they're not your typical underseeded team, like if this exact same storyline had happened, but it was Duquesne, who was also an 11 seed, who also went on a surprise run to win their conference tournament, I think the story would be much bigger. And I think for some reason, like understandably, I'm not saying that I get why that would be the case.
Right. Because that would be like a straight up Cinderella.
Right. NC State is in one of the most historically prestigious basketball conferences in the country. Like I get why it's not necessarily carrying that same amount of weight, but it is an incredible story. And if you had told me before this game that DJ Burns was going to score 4 points and that they were going to win, there's no way that I would have believed you. Now, granted, if you had also told me Marquette's going to miss 27 3-pointers, Like nothing else matters. If you told me Marquette misses 27 threes, I don't care if DJ Burns doesn't even play. There's no way Marquette wins that basketball game. And that is what happened. Marquette shot 13% from three in this game. Just an absolutely awful three-point shooting performance from Shaka Smart's team. And here they are. This is a program that has failed to reach a lot of the expectations in the NCAA tournament. And while, getting all the way to the Sweet 16 is not a terrible result, losing to an 11 seed with a really bad offensive performance like they had, I mean, things are starting to not feel so good in Milwaukee right now.
Yeah, and Andy, I think that is, we've used this phrase a lot in the last couple of days, but that is the ecstasy and the agony of a one-off tournament. I mean, because clearly, if we're the NBA and NC State and Marquette are playing a series, it might go 5, 6, 7 games, but Marquette's winning that thing, dude.
Most likely,
unless Tyler Kolek gets hurt again. And that's just what makes what we do so special, because this thing is different and unique and can allow for things like this. But it is always a bummer for the better seeds, because one off day shooting like this can kill you and send you home, and you don't get to do it all over again, because it's not the NBA where we're signing all these contracts. You got dudes that are moving on and we'll never have this exact same team. And Andy, especially in this modern era, I think we're getting this more and more because of teams' reliance on 3-point shooting.
Yeah.
That like BYU, what a test case for that, who has lived this entire year that way, and it got them out. You talked about Duquesne, that locked them out of the tournament in round one, and here we sit.
I knew we would start this show with multiple Duquesne references in the first 7 minutes of the show. But no, you're absolutely right, and I think to kind of put a bow on the conversation about this game before we get to Duke Houston, if you're going to miss 27 threes in a game, or if you're going to have it doesn't have to be that volume, but if you're going to have a bad 3-point shooting game, you need your low post scorers, your non 3-point shooters, to step up. And Oso Ighodaro, he rebounded the ball well in this game, but he had 6 points. Yeah. Like you cannot. I mean, he helped neutralize Burns. Again, we talked about Burns only having 4 points, but Oso needed to be a bigger offensive piece in this game. And Marquette, for whatever reason, either didn't make those adjustments, just kind of tried to shoot themselves out of the slump, but it ultimately didn't work. And you mentioned the ecstasy and the agony of the NCAA tournament. I'm going to use that to transition to talk about Duke Houston, because one-off series, one of the worst things that can happen in a one-off game is to have a game in some ways determined by an injury. And I don't want to claim with any kind of conviction that Houston would have won this game if Jamal Shead didn't get hurt, because I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. Emmanuel Sharp was supposed to step up.
And if you did, I want to find out. Like, I need to get betting advice.
Right. Yeah. If I knew for sure, I'd be making a lot of money doing other things. But Emmanuel Sharp's supposed to step up in the absence of Shead, and he only had 7 points in this game. So I don't know necessarily what happens if Shead plays, but what a tough thing to see happen for Jamal. Second year in a row, the straw that stirs the drink for Houston, the key veteran senior guard, gets hurt late in the season. Marcus Sasser got hurt towards the end of the year last year. He ended up coming back and playing. Shead obviously will not get that opportunity. He goes out of this game with an ankle injury, does not return as we're recording right now, unless you know something I don't know a specific update on Shead's status, but Houston knocked out of this tournament with Duke getting a 3.54-51 victory.
Yeah, I mean, still, I think the latest we knew, because they had an X-ray machine there, and so they were able to find out that it was negative, but just bad sprain. But yeah, I mean, that I never heard anything after that. And Andy, I think you set that up really well, because that's always the thing. Like, Duke shouldn't have to apologize.
Yeah.
For still winning this game. And I think that's the thing, is some people are going to downgrade this win because of that injury. But I want to honor what Houston did, because they regrouped at halftime and they came out and shot much better than they were doing even with him in the game in the first half, at least at the beginning of the second half. And then they just weren't able to execute down the stretch. Tyrese Proctor made some really good plays in the closing minutes, had that little floater, a couple defensive stops. And but Andy, here's the interesting thing for me. We had multiple times in the lead up to this game, you and I had said, we're so excited for this electric backcourt battle, but we believe it'll be won in the front court and by Houston, who will be too tough for Kyle Filipowski and Jeremy Young. And it appeared to be going exactly that way out of the stretch as Houston scored the first 8 points of this game, all by their front court, by the way. But then Duke held on, responded, and started to work their way back. And then John Shire found something in the second half, started playing Flip and Ryan Young together, which is something we do not see from this Duke team, like ever. That was a shrewd coaching move, I thought, by John Shire, because it mitigated some of that front court advantage for Houston. They weren't able to exploit some of the mismatches and post up. And then Kyle Filipowski, I thought, rose to the occasion. Oftentimes where we see him not able to be that level of tough, I think he heard that all week long, and he was like, screw this, man. I'm going to go out. And there was a play late in the game. He used some force down in the post, got it up, score, and won. And I just thought we said it, and what we said was right, that the front court would determine it, but we just had it about the wrong team.
Yeah. Flip, his efficiency numbers on 2-pointers in this game were not phenomenal. He was 3 of 5 from 3, but he hit the shots.
Two of which, by the way, if I might say, were late shot clock. That was crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he hit some very clutch threes at big times. Led all scorers in this game with 16, had 9 boards, 3 of them on the offensive glass against a really tough physical team. I think you're absolutely right. Filipowski rose to the occasion and got it done here, and now he gets a chance to play a team that he already beat this year. We'll get more into the actual matchup between Duke and NC State later in the show, but they needed Flip to play one of his better games, or at least play at rise to the level against this Houston physicality, and he got it done.
Yes, he did. Andy, Baylor Shireman versus Dalton Connect. It was the matchup we were looking forward to, and boy, did it deliver in a big way on Friday night. Shireman had the bare close edge in the individual matchup, but Dalton Connect is the one moving on, while Purdue put away Gonzaga to punch their ticket to the Elite Eight and work on their redemption tour. We're going to get to all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you that this March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. And that team, Andy, we just talked about them, the NC State Wolfpack, are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance Friday night, beating Marquette to continue their miraculous run this postseason. They're now one step away from their first Final Four since 1983, the year before I was born, and all that stands in their way is ACC rival Duke. They say win life, go Rogue, and that's exactly what the Wolfpack have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Andy, we turn our attention now to the Midwest region, where we got chalk. It's the only region where we've got the chalk. The closest other region would be the East, where they've got 1 versus 3. And Andy, just before tip-off of this game, the Tennessee basketball official account tweeted out that Santiago Vescovi, their starting shooting guard, would be out for this game with the flu, and then Jemai Meshack started in his place. Thankfully, if that's Creighton, I feel a lot worse than if it's Tennessee, because Tennessee has more depth to handle such a blow. But Andy, let me just ask you this initially. When you heard that news, what did you think that meant for the Vols in this game?
Yeah, I thought it put even more pressure on Connect to be an offensive, to step up and be, the guy that he's been this year, where he's had these 35, 38, 40-plus point games in the SEC, at times being kind of Tennessee's entire offense. And while he led the team in scoring, and he had 24 points, and he had an overall productive game and hit big shots down the stretch, that's kind of not exactly what the storyline was. It was these other guards for Tennessee stepping up in a major way. Ziegler had 18. That's a huge game for him. Josiah Jordan James had 17 as well. Like Meshack only had 4 points, but he had 8 boards. He had 2 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. Like a really overall
good hustle plays too. Just getting on the ground.
Big hustle plays from him. Jordan Gainey had 7 points off the bench. He also had a really critical turnover at the end of the game that I thought was going to potentially cost Tennessee more than it did. But I think that was one of the big storylines, is that this Tennessee team shot really well from 3, without necessarily Dalton Knecht. Knecht was 3 of 7, which is solid, but Tennessee was 45% even on the game. I think without him, they were 8 of 17. That's my quick math right there. So that's really, really good for Tennessee to be shooting that well without counting Dalton Knecht's numbers. And I think I wouldn't have expected that from Tennessee. This is a team that has not shot it well outside of Knecht all year long. I kind of expected Adu to get neutralized offensively, and that was clearly the case. He was just 2 of 8 in this game, having to go up against Kalkbrenner. But it was the other Tennessee guards. And again, not to discredit Knecht. I mean, again, he had 24 points. He was
But
very
you expect
good.
that from him.
But that's what you expect from him. It was the other players stepping up to help lead Tennessee to a win here over a Creighton team that, like you said, if they lost one of their starters, I'd feel a lot more concerned about what the spot they would have been. And having said that, Baylor Shireman, he was incredible in this game for Creighton.
And Andy, what's interesting, you talked about that 3-point shooting for Tennessee. It was almost identical to Creighton's. Creighton was 11 of 23. By the way, your on-the-fly math was perfect. Way to go. And Tennessee was 11 of 24. So, like, matching Creighton 3 for 3, basically, is incredible, and that mitigates it. Andy, what about these second-half wild runs that we saw?
Baylor, 18-0 run for Tennessee at one point, right? Is that right?
Yes, that's what it got out to. And that run started because the first half was played in such tight quarters, neither team really getting much of a margin. And then Creighton's up 2, and then we get this 18-0 run. But because it had been played in such tight proximity, Tennessee went up 4, and that was their largest lead of the game. That was a 6-0 run. It's like, oh, wow, they pulled a little way ahead. And you don't expect anything like this. And so it was just so completely out of nowhere that Tennessee goes on this run. I started seeing national college basketball writers tweeting things like, I guess we're done in Detroit. And, well, let's not count those chickens before they hatch, fellas, because Creighton responds in kind. And I love it, Andy. Like, that's what March is all about. They come marching back, get it all the way down. Was 3 the closest they got it back to?
Yes, I think so.
And then just Tennessee was able to hold on, make enough plays down the stretch. And I like unbelievable basketball game from the tight first half to the wild runs of the second. And ultimately now, Andy, Tennessee proves it. They've got enough to move on.
Yeah, and they set up a matchup against the number 1 seed Purdue, a rematch of the second game in the Maui Invitational. Purdue played Gonzaga in the first round in the Maui Invitational, won that game. They then beat Tennessee in the second round. We will see if they can do that again as they set up the rematch here. The Boilermakers, 80-68 was the final score over Gonzaga. It's funny because in some ways that feels like a score that is almost closer than how the second half felt, but at the same time, a huge chunk of this game were much closer than a 12-point game. So I don't know if that score like accurately reflects the final margin in either direction. Gonzaga was down 4 at halftime. They had a 6-point lead at one point. The game was within 5 or 6 points, I think, for the first 28, 29 minutes
it felt like
of action in this game. And then Purdue finally pulled away in the second half. Foul trouble was the issue for Gonzaga. Ben Gregg picked up 2 early ones. Anton Watson picked up his 4th. When he came out of the game, Purdue had a 1-point lead. By the time he came back in the game, it was double digits, and it was never closer than that. It was the way that Purdue has beat so many teams this year. They just grinded them down. Gonzaga had a game plan to try to make the non-Zach Edey players beat them. And in the first half, it didn't work. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer and Lance Jones in particular were really, really good in the first half of this game. Mason Gillis hit a couple threes as well. And in the second half, Gonzaga tried to do a few different things defensively, let Edey go more one-on-one. Yeah. And when your bigs already have 3 or 4 fouls and they're defending Edey one-on-one, it's just not going to work. It's not. Ultimately resulted in the same thing. Gonzaga played close in the first half against Purdue back in Maui and lost and was outscored by 15 in the second half. This time I think they were outscored by more than that, or right around that at least.
Just eight.
Yeah, that's right. It was just 8 because they were down by 4. But yeah, they at times they were outscored by much more than that. That's they ended up kind of crawling back.
That's right.
But great season for Gonzaga to be in this position where they were in the Sweet 16 after we had conversations about whether they were a bubble team a few months ago. But the story here is ultimately Purdue Purdue, continuing to fight, continuing to do what we thought that they might do and what Virginia did 5 years ago when they responded from losing to a 16 seed to win the national championship. Purdue still got a couple games left to do it, but man, the way they're playing right now, the only team that looks definitively as good or better than them that's still in this tournament is UConn. And we will see if we end up ultimately getting the UConn-Purdue matchup in the national championship, because right now Purdue's going to they look tough.
Andy, I started this is getting way ahead of ourselves here, and I'm going to come back to this game. I started thinking earlier in this week, we could have a Zach Edey, Donovan Clingan national championship matchup.
How fun.
That would be the sweetest, sexiest thing that I would see. It would be incredible. Anyway, look, Andy, we talked, and everyone that covers basketball talked about last year when Purdue lost. It was squarely on not squarely, but in a big way on the shoulders of those two freshman guards. And that's not fair to them, because that's what freshman guards should do at times. Yeah. Like, the fact that they did as well as they did last season leading this attack was frankly so impressive. And seeing them continue to rise to the occasion now in their sophomore, I mean, Braden Smith, yet again, so close to triple-double numbers, 14 points on an efficient 6 of 11, 2 of 4 from 3, 15 assists. Are you kidding me? Yeah. And 8 boards, Andy. Like, I just want to give both of these young men their flowers for taking all those punches, absorbing them, and then now they're rising to the occasion to do that. And so Braden Smith, in some ways, equally so important to what Zach Edey did in this game. And Zach Edey's run, I believe, I don't have the stat in front of me, like 5 straight games now of 25-10 or something like that. Yeah. It's just absolutely absurd what they're doing. Andy, what you mentioned it, but what Gonzaga has done to rally this team together, the way Mark Few has been able, because I just think it was an issue of a team not quite knowing roles and who everyone is with all the new people coming in, and the way he's been able to continue on the fly throughout the season, bringing those pieces together, making it into the team that we've seen the last several weeks now, says so much to me about the players' willingness to buy in and Mark Few's ability to coach a team. And look, this is what every coach in America has to do now, Andy, to earn their paycheck because of the transfer portal. They're going to have to figure out how to do this. The ones that can adapt and grow their teams throughout the course of the season are going to find success. The ones that can't are going to be getting pink slips.
Yep. And for Gonzaga, it was an issue of players almost being too deferential and like wanting who's going to be the guy who takes over the team. And eventually Mark Few had to go to Graham and be like, it's you. You are the guy who's going to be our dude in the front court. And once he established that role, Nembhard got more comfortable with his role, and then things just kicked off in a significant way. And we got, 6 months of off-season content coming up where we can discuss this further. But Gonzaga's only losing one player, at least guaranteed, in Anton Watson. And they already added a big transfer in Michael Ajayi. This is a team that could be right back in that mix as a top 10 team, depending on if they lose any other players in the portal. And the way that Mark Few's team was able to grow throughout the year was absolutely incredible. But Isaac, we got an Elite Eight now with 3 ACC teams, totally not the conversation we expected to be having. We have no Big 12 teams. That entire conference is left empty-handed here in the Elite Eight. And we're going to discuss these weekend's matchups coming up on Saturday and Sunday, coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you that today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Folks, say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or you're betting on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 you can use on point spreads, money lines, player props. You can even pick who you think is going to win it all. Right now, we got Alabama is a 3.5-point favorite over Clemson. Clemson has not been favored in their last couple games, and yet they keep beating that spread. Something to keep in mind. If you want to join us on those betting lines, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, Isaac, let's take a look at these actual Elite Eight matchups. We'll talk about how the Sweet 16 ended, how we got to this point with 8 teams left. And I'll start with the conference affiliation, because It's pretty unique. And it obviously starts with there being 3 ACC teams left, at least one ACC team guaranteed to get into the Final Four. Of course, those teams are Duke, NC State, and Clemson. You have 2 Big Ten teams left, the 2 that you would expect to be left. 3-seed Illinois is left, as well as Purdue. And then you have 2 SEC teams. And look, the SEC, massive struggles in the first round of this tournament, like in a shockingly bad first weekend of games for the SEC. And yet here they are with 2 teams still dancing in this NCAA tournament. And then you have 1 team in the Big East. Of course, that is UConn, Marquette, and Creighton both had chances to advance. Creighton loses to one of those SEC teams in Tennessee. Marquette, of course, loses to NC State. But we don't have any Big 12 teams. And that, I think, like, we don't have any Pac-12 teams either, but that was kind of all resting on Arizona. And now the Pac-12 is officially, I mean, unless Washington State and Oregon State can save the brand, the Pac-12 is done in the NCAA tournament. But to not have any Big 12 teams, we saw Illinois upset Iowa State. We saw, of course, tonight, we saw Houston go down to Duke. And for a conference that has been labeled as the best basketball conference, I think judging a conference based on how many Elite Eight teams is kind of silly, but I know that people like to do that. Does this mean demonstrably that the ACC is the best conference in college basketball, or was the best conference this season? No, it means that 3 of their teams got hot at the right time and advanced to the Elite Eight. That's genuinely what it means. There is maybe a larger conversation about the ACC not getting the respect they deserved in the regular season. I do think that both those things can be true at once. But it's notable to me that there are no Big 12 teams remaining, regardless of how we feel about what specifically this means.
Andy, do you hear that? I think that's Leaf Tulane celebrating his call of the Big 12 being slightly overrated. No, Andy, you're spot on. Let's first say that what happens in this NCAA tournament does not replace a season's worth of results, right? It's based on who moves on, who you're facing, individual matchups. And as we said earlier in the show, the randomness of how each team performs on one night in a one-off tournament. So that's all part of this conversation. But that said, it really is interesting that the Big 12 is just not even here. It really is interesting that the ACC has 3 teams here. And so I think part of it does go to how we talk about, like, when we rate conferences, remember that it includes every team in these conferences. That's all part of it. And so, because this is a function and a factor of more thinking about the teams at the top and how good they are. So in some ways, like, where people want to talk about, like, how we value or devalue non-conference strength of schedule, it's the kind of thing where, well, some of these ACC teams, for example, might go out and play a stronger non-con because they know that in the computers, the ACC schedule is going to be devalued somewhat. And it's the reverse in the Big 12. And so I just think we have to find more broad ways to talk about the strength of conferences than just the computer ratings. And I say that as someone who uses those and values them and thinks Ken Palm and Torvik and Evan Mia do a great job. But it is a more big and broad conversation than that.
Well, and one of the coaches who really kind of put this conversation to the forefront was Brad Brownell at Clemson. So I want to talk about that matchup first. It's out of order on our sheet here that we're looking at, but because Clemson, so first of all, 3 of these 4 matchups that we're going to talk about here in the Elite Eight have already happened this season. And I didn't have the data to know how rare that is. The only matchup that has not happened before this year is UConn, Illinois, which actually hasn't happened since 1994, incidentally enough. We talked about Purdue and Tennessee having played in Maui. Obviously, NC State and Duke are both in the ACC, so they've played each other. But the other one is Alabama, Clemson. And Clemson really challenged themselves in the non-conference. They played quite a few good teams and did extremely well. And we kind of, made jokes in the regular season of, Clemson's Clemsoning again. They're struggling in the ACC. And I think what Brownell's argument would be, and he's backed it up, is, well, we played good teams in the non-conference and beat them. And then we played conference games and lost them. And that doesn't mean we got dramatically worse. It means that the teams we were playing are also good. And he has a point, because now he's a team who defeated a Big 12 school in Baylor in the NCAA tournament, defeated a good Pac-12 school in Arizona, future Big 12 team, now has an opportunity to beat an Alabama team that they already beat. And I think that's a key thing, that this is a really good Alabama team, and Clemson beat them in Tuscaloosa. They went to Alabama, and 85-77 was that final score there. Clemson shot 52.5% from 3. And yes, celebrating Clemson's offensive accomplishments against a very bad Alabama defense may seem kind of silly, but they're going to get another shot at it. PJ Hall 21-8 in that game. I'm really excited to see what PJ Hall versus Grant Nelson Part 2 looks like. Two teams played. Nelson obviously was incredible down the stretch for Bama against North Carolina. Can you do it again? This is a really fun matchup. 2 top 25 offenses in the country right now at KenPom, but Alabama's defense outside the top 100 right now. Clemson's defense, meanwhile, is up to 32. Another big storyline for this game is going to be whether Latrell Wrightsell, who did not play for Alabama in their last game, whether he is available. But there's a lot of intrigue outside of these 2 schools being the football schools that are still left here. There's a lot of fun in this matchup.
Yeah, Andy, and it's going to be the first Final Four ever for one of them. So congrats to one of these schools on their first ever Final Four. Great stuff. Andy, the other game on Saturday, today, as you're watching or listening this, because it's after midnight everywhere except the Pacific time zone, is the reigning national except for Andy. It's still, 10:28 for you?
Yep.
Yeah. Number 1 overall UConn against number 3 Illinois. Right now at KenPom, these are offenses number 1 Illinois and number 2 in the nation. And so how funny for Illinois, coming off playing the best defense in the nation, now plays the second best offense in the nation, and not that UConn is bad defensively, but Illinois is. I mean, they've jumped up to like 84th now at KenPom, so way to grow, I guess. But still, it's far outside the realm of what we see national championship caliber teams ever being, Andy. And so, I mean, is there anything at all? And I know we got to be quick on this because we got 2 other games to mention. But is there anything at all that tells you that UConn doesn't just keep doing what they've been doing?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine they don't. And I think, I mean, it's not impossible to imagine that. Obviously, Illinois is a very good offensive team. They're going to find ways to get their buckets, but I think UConn's equipped to prevent Terrence Shannon Jr. from doing what he does. They'll have some bigger physical guards on him, whether it's Newton, whether it's Castle. His ability to drive to the rim will be neutralized primarily by Donovan Clingan, who's very good at that, of course. So I do see it being more of a challenge for Illinois to advance in this game. UConn, like you mentioned, Illinois is not a good defensive team. UConn is 6th. So they're first in offensive efficiency. They are 6th in defensive efficiency. That is just insane levels of balance for this Huskies team. Illinois does not have that, and I think that ultimately gives them the advantage.
So watch for Illinois trying to isolate defensively and how UConn's able to stand up to that as they do. Andy, let's turn quickly to the Sunday games. Remember the Sunday games, thankfully, are in the kind of afternoon and early evening times. Thank you, finally, scheduling gods. Number 1, Purdue versus number 2, Tennessee. As we talked about, the only straight chalk region left. That one's 2:20 Eastern on CBS. FanDuel has it Purdue -3.5. As Andy said earlier, Purdue and Tennessee played back in Maui. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this one goes this time. Who for Purdue guards Dalton Knecht? That will be an interesting matchup to watch. Similar to what we said about Latrell Wrightsell for Alabama. Will Santiago Vescovi be healthy? The last we've heard is that he will be reevaluated on Saturday, and then we'll probably know more on that. And then, Andy, we've got that all ACC Elite 8 matchup to see who goes to the Final Four, guaranteed at least one ACC team, which is wild. Number 11, NC State. Can they carry the miracle run against number 4, Duke, who they beat en route to their ACC championship, I might mention? 5:05 Eastern on CBS, Duke by 6.5. Andy, can they keep it going?
I absolutely they can. I'm not saying I'm picking that game necessarily, but it would be wild to not believe that NC State can continue to keep winning in this tournament the way that they have. They're on a hot streak right now in this big winning streak that they've had. They beat Duke by 5 in that ACC tournament, so they're clearly capable of taking that team down. We're going to continue to kind of hammer home the points that we have made about Duke's lack of front court protection or of rim protection of just physicality in the front court. Clearly, it was not an issue against Houston, so we can't assume that it's going to be a continue to plague them. I think if it gets to to a matchup where Duke ends up playing Purdue, then we're going to revisit that conversation yet again, because that's always a part of the conversation when somebody's playing Purdue. But yeah, I think DJ Burns and NC State and Mo Diarra and the way that this team has been playing is more than capable of taking down Duke and being in the Final Four, which would be an unbelievably insane story for this Wolfpack team. But it's advantage Duke right now. They're the better basketball team, but these two teams split in the regular season, and Duke picked up a nice win here, but NC State's definitely the hotter team.
Man, Andy, great stuff. I cannot wait for these Elite Eight matchups that are upcoming, folks. That's it for this episode of Locked On College Basketball. Thanks as always for tuning in. We talked about that billboard earlier, and as Andy has said multiple times on Saturday or on Friday, it's all because of all of you who come to hang out here with us all the time, and because of the great work that Locked On does, everyone behind the scenes, and our great sponsors, people like Amazon. So thank you profusely and profoundly to all of you. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord, please come join us. We'd love to have you there. The link is in the show notes. It's free to join, and you're not going to want to miss out on these final couple days of this college basketball season. Oh, man. If you haven't subscribed to the show on audio or video, please do that. It's so easy. Just smash that little like button. If you want to make sure you catch us when we go live after games on Saturday and Sunday, hit that bell. It'll notify you when we go live, and you click right in. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and we'll see you when we go live on Saturday night after the first two Elite Eight games. But until then, peace.